But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro: Shemai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shemai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian.
A few years ago, archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery: an untouched burial containing a 4,000-year-old coffin with a perfectly preserved mummy inside. The coffin, covered with hieroglyphic markings, immediately provided vital information to the archaeologists regarding the identity of the mummy. Inside the coffin lay the remains of a male named Shemai, described as a high-ranking member of the elite family credited with founding cities in the region of Upper Kemet. However, the most surprising revelation for scientists was not Shemai's status, but his race. He was determined to be black. For the first time, scientists acknowledged the presence of black people in ancient Egypt, not as foreigners, soldiers, or servants, but in positions of power within the elite class. Let's watch it.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro: Shemai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shemai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shemai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shemai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed.
However crazy it may seem to some people, this is something I've been saying for a very long time. The natives of Kemet are the Africans who came from the south. Narmer, considered the first ruler of Kemet, and his depictions clearly indicate his African heritage. But Shemai's discovery hid a secret overlooked by many. Something that could change everything we understand about ancient Egypt. So, stick around until the end of this video, because this revelation will blow your mind. But before revealing that secret, I need to tell you a little story. A little story. When talking about Kemet, it's important to always specify the period and the location, because that country has been invaded multiple times and experienced multiple foreign influences. Shemai lived in Upper Kemet during the 12th dynasty, one of the most significant periods of Kemet's history. It's the Middle Kingdom, a time when pharaohs were still building pyramids. But most importantly, a time that precedes the most significant invasions of Kemet from Asia or Nubia. In other words, we are talking about a period when ancient Egypt was still ancient Egypt, ruled by its native people. This period directly preceded the first troubles caused by Asiatic immigration, as attested by historical texts.
What are the Laments of Ippur? The Laments of Ippur was a Middle Kingdom Egyptian literary text. According to the text, a man called Ippur appeared in the court of an unnamed pharaoh and described Kemet's chaotic state. The order was disturbed by a social revolution, the rich became poor, and the poor rich. Social anarchy was spreading all over the land, while cultural values were broken under the indifferent gaze of society. This genre, known as complaints or laments, reflects the point of view of the scribal elite to which their authors belonged. These texts provided insight into expected social standards by lamenting the current disaster state of affairs. Another major event mentioned was foreign incursions in the Delta during that period. Foreigners from the Near East were flooding into Egypt to become Egyptians. So, many people in the Delta were foreigners whose forefathers invaded the Delta since the first intermediate period. They eventually became Egyptians, but did not reflect the indigenous population. Evidence that a silent invasion had begun long before the Hyksos takeover and natives had felt it. This will be the topic of our next video. Subscribe to not miss it.
Shemai's coffin was incredible. It was covered in beautiful hieroglyphic symbols, immediately giving the archaeologists vital information about the identity of the mummy within the sarcophagus. Alejandro Jimenez Serrano of the University of Jaén said that the tomb's mummy, covered with polychrome cartonnage, collars, and a mask, was very well preserved. The symbols identified Shemai's father as a man called Kima, powerful governor of that region of Upper Kemet under Amenemhat II. Shemai's mother was a woman called Sadathotep, daughter of the ruler of that region of Upper Kemet, Serenput I, a man who was known as the right arm of Pharaoh Senusret I. Shemai's eldest brother, Serenput II, also served as governor of Elephantine under the rule of Senwosret II and Senwosret III. So, we are not talking about a bunch of random individuals here. These are very important figures in ancient Egypt. Powerful and wealthy families with a lot of influence in Kemet. But here's what the expert said.
And in this sense, Shemai is representing the society of the frontier in which different ethnic groups were mixed.
After the acknowledgement of Shemai's blackness, the expert said that the reason why Shemai was black is due to the fact that he came from a mixed area next to the frontier, implying the border with Sudan around Nubia. This narrative suggests that while some black people lived in Egypt, indigenous Egyptians weren't black. A way to imply that ancient Egyptians belonged to some mysterious non-black race, and that some black African people were allowed to live in southern Egypt and be Egyptians. But they weren't representative of the indigenous population and constituted a lower class. A trick that is being overused today, and that I exposed in this video. Shemai's family came from Upper Kemet. However, contrary to what the scientist is saying, Upper Kemet wasn't some random mixed area. It was the most important region of Kemet, the headquarters of pharaohs, their ancestral land. Most people ignore it, but 99.9% of indigenous pharaohs came from that region. Their families were indigenous to that region or from further south inside Africa.
The people in Upper Egypt, they are dark, African. And the African languages also has origin of the hieroglyphic grammar.
The Valley of Kings, where some of the greatest pharaohs were buried, is also located there. Evidence of its importance. So, what the scientist is presenting as an exception to the rule should actually be seen as a norm in ancient Egypt, especially among the elites.
What are the Edfu texts? In the heart of Upper Egypt, heartland of the pharaohs, lies the Temple of Edfu, an ancient marvel that has seen the rise and fall of empires. The temple's history dates back to the Old Kingdom period, and it has undergone multiple transformations since then. However, what makes it truly unique are the Edfu texts, a collection of inscriptions that hold the secrets to the origins of Kemet, the ancient civilization that once flourished in the Nile Valley, today called Ancient Egypt. The Edfu texts were written during the Ptolemaic period, but their content is far older. They contain fragments of real history, woven together in a narrative that speaks of Ra-Harmachis, king of Ta-seti, true name of Nubia, who conquered Egypt and established himself as king at Edfu. From there, he dispatched his son Horus and the blacksmiths to conquer the delta and unify the whole territory under their rule. Together they founded the civilization of Kemet. This story is a testament to the origins of ancient Egypt, and it reveals a truth that modern scholars often overlook. It shows that to the Egyptian officials, their gods, kings and nation didn't originate in the Middle East, but in Black Africa.
You see that according to ancient Egyptian sacred texts, that frontier area, located in the south, can't be considered as some random foreign border regions since it represents a key area from which their original pharaohs and gods came from. Most civil wars in ancient Egypt emerged when a northern leader from the Mediterranean region or from Asia was trying to rule. Because the rule was that the leaders must always come from the southern families, from Inner Africa. So, Shemai was black. But it was normal for an indigenous Egyptian. This discovery created a lot of controversy with people claiming that he wasn't a pharaoh, but just some minor individual. But despite all the information shared, most people still missed a very important point. A point that completely changes the mainstream narrative of that civilization.
And second, it's really difficult to just use cranial or bone examination and just say, yeah, they were all black, they were all white, they were all olive skin, Middle East and what have you.
In this video, YouTuber Meta makes what seems like a very solid point regarding my claims about ancient Egyptians. To him, we can't just use bones to identify the ethnicity of someone. We need more.
Because all I need is to find one pharaoh and be like, okay, this guy, genetic testing, he was not black, and that's already a problem.
In this clip, he's implying that in order to determine someone's race, we need to know his genetics. But is it true? And why?
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
What is racism? In order to answer that question, we need to know what is racism. According to Britannica.com, racism, also called racialism, is the belief that humans can be divided into separate and exclusive biological entities called races, that there is a causal link between inherited physical traits and traits of personality, intellect, morality, and other cultural and behavioral features, and that some races are innately superior to others. So, we see that by definition, racism is based on physical traits, and it implies that based on that fact, some people are inferior. This is something I already addressed in my previous video about crepe and dieta. Civilization. That's a powerful word, right? A word symbolizing greatness and everything noble. But also a word that has been weaponized all over the slavery and colonial eras. For example, Western nations use the expression civilizing mission. It refers to a concept often used to justify colonialism by suggesting that the colonial nations believed they were bringing civilization, education, and progress to the colonized territories. With that colonial heritage, our perception of anything related to civilization leads us to Europe, to whiteness, and more importantly to what people call Caucasian features. And you'll understand why this is important soon. The reason why people make these memes is because to them, nothing that looks like this can be linked to civilization and all the greatness that is attached to that concept. On the other hand, it is easier to connect this feature to everything that is inferior. So based on the definition of racism, racism has always been used without genetics. Genetics didn't even exist when racism was invented. It has been used for centuries and is still used today without genetics. People don't discriminate Africans because they belong to haplogroup E, or because they have some specific alleles. It's about their phenotype, what they look like. But according to the new trend pushed by Meta and many others, we need genetics to know if someone is black, white, or else. Is it true? Let's play a game. What race are they? If I show you both these people and ask you to determine their race, what would you say? I want you to pause the video and answer it in the comments below. We'll see if you are right. Okay, I'm pretty sure that if you are honest, you said that they are black. But what if I tell you that they aren't Africans, but Asians? These are Jarawa and Andamanese people. When we study their genetics, we find that genetically they are closer to Asians than to black Africans. Black Africans are genetically closer to Europeans than to them. This may be surprising. In other words, genetics doesn't really tell us much about people's race, since race is based on look. But let's continue our little game. If I show you these people, in which race would you classify them? Pause the video and answer it in the comments below. Okay, once again, if you are honest, you have probably said that they belong to the black race. And that's true. These men are from Central Africa in Chad and Cameroon. But when we analyze them genetically, they belong to the R1b lineage, the one to which the majority of modern European males belong to. But they look completely different from the average white man. Shocking, right? Another evidence that using genetics to identify people's races doesn't always work. While genetics play a significant role in shaping and identifying various aspects of our physical characteristics, such as eye color and hair texture, there are other factors that are more significant in determining how individuals look, or what we need here, their race. Having an autosomal DNA that is linked to West Asia doesn't mean that you look like a modern Levantine. Belonging to haplogroup or 1b doesn't mean that you are white. It's important to remember that when all haplogroups emerged, white people didn't exist yet. So, none of these genetic markers is really a marker of whiteness. They all originated as markers of black people. But maybe you still doubt me. So, let's talk about something that most people didn't notice about Shemai's discovery. How did the European and the Egyptian scientists have been able to identify that Shemai was black without even knowing his genetics? Have you noticed that? Remember that according to Meta, and many of my detractors, we need to know people's genetic to know their race. But here, we can clearly see experts finding Shemai's race without genetics. So how did they do it? Well, here's the answer.
Dr. Giorgio Manzi of the University of Rome is the world's foremost expert on human remains in Libya, and his department boasts an impressive collection of Libyan skulls.
The reason why the members of the Italian team in the 50s inferred that the child was a black child, a Negro child, is mainly a consideration of his face, especially the length here of the root of the nose, or also here the moving forward of the mouth.
The mummy's teeth also revealed his age at death.
When the Italian team first examined the Wamuja child, they looked at the teeth and found that it was very young. Especially using X-rays, it was easy to determine the exact age, looking at teeth still in the bone, in the alveolus.
Based on this specialist from Meta's country, which is Italy, we know people's races based on their bone structure. But doesn't that remind you of something? That's something I have said many times, but people keep denying it. Now, the question should be, what does the bone structure of ancient Egyptians tells us about their race? And here's my complete answer. But maybe this is not enough for you as evidence. So, let's go deeper, because over here, we don't spread wishes and lies to our community. We come with receipts from true scientific research and show everything. Remember that Metatron claimed to have worked with a whole team of linguists and anthropologists, etc. But have you noticed that none of these people have really been useful in his whole video? His linguists did not even tell him where was located the land of origins of Afro-Asiatic languages, since he believed that it was at the border of Egypt and Asia, and his anthropologist has been absent. He mentioned him, but none of what he has presented us in his video actually uses anthropology. Despite his random Greek quotes, there is nothing really scientific about that video. He spent more time destroying the image of Quilimica and talking about irrelevant topics than bringing scientific evidence. That's just another technique to make it look deeper than it actually is. It's just smoke. There is absolutely nothing behind. But maybe you think I'm joking. Let's go deeper. As I taught Aslan the TikToker in this video, people's facial phenotype is not determined by genetics or wishes. It is determined by analysis of their bodies by anthropologists. So, what does anthropology tell us about the ancient Egyptians? Well, let's start slow. Let's start with their bodies. The University of Cambridge realized a study on body proportions of ancient Egyptians using skeletons from Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom pharaohs such as Thutmose I, the Second, the Third, and the Fourth. Queen Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramses II. They concluded that Egyptian rulers' body proportions were super negroid, resulting in evolving in the African hot climate. From the early dynasties to the late indigenous pharaohs, meaning that they were even more negroid than most modern black people. Let's pause here. Guys, I'm not talking about random people or Nubians here. I want it to be clear. You understand that we are talking about the pharaohs, right? Tutankhamun, Ramses, etc. They look like black people, not whites. It is even written in the studies here, by white experts who actually exist. Not like those of Metatron. Okay? And I want to remind you that modern Egyptians are not super Negroid as attested by Sonia Zakshevsky. Here you have the receipts. All sources will be in the caption. Now let's talk about their facial structures. Because people's faces are determined by their bone structures, not DNA or wishes. That's why all dark-skinned people are not necessarily part of the same ethnic groups. What does the data say? Well, let's watch this.
Who were the Bedarians? Most experts, like Sonia Zakrzewski, demonstrated that ancient Egypt's development was primarily indigenous. That is, the individuals who built that civilization already lived in that territory right before its appearance. Who were they? According to studies, a few major cultural groups inhabited in the area before the dynastic period. The Bedarians were among them. They lived in Middle Egypt. So, what did they look like? Numerous Western anthropologists who studied them provided answers. They discovered that the Bedari people had short cranial vaults and significant subnasal prognathism, which is the anterior projection of the lower face relative to the upper face. This feature is the most observed among black Africans, contrary to other groups who have little to no prognathism. So, Egypt's indigenous inhabitants, the Bedarians, were black Africans. This type of skulls have also been discovered in all locations surrounding Egypt. It's also clearly apparent on Egypt's most iconic monument, the Great Sphinx. However, this is the topic of our next video. Like, subscribe and activate the bell.
So, from what we know, the data says that not only ancient Egyptians' bodies were more Negroid than those of modern black people, their skulls also had that particular Negroid-shaped characteristic of black Africans. If you doubt that, all you have to do is look at the Great Sphinx. He is there, still standing with his beautiful subnasal prognathism. Does this really look like a northern Indian? Here we are talking about dynastic Egypt. Not Egypt after it was invaded and controlled by foreigners. The statement about some late ancient Egyptians' hair looking like Indians are not that crazy. Why? Because that is something I have always said. Especially in this video about their hair. Eric Krubazi, who is a real expert, who actually exists, not some ghost anthropologist, studied the ancient Egyptians' mummies. He concluded that what was in the beginning remained all over dynastic Egypt. The major changes only occurred during the Greco-Roman period. And guess when these European scholars highlighted by Metatron lived? During the Greco-Roman period, after these changes occurred. We don't even know if the people they saw were true Egyptians. So, everything Metatron said is completely irrelevant, as I have already proved it by comparing the scholars earlier. Now, let's talk about the last element of what determines people's phenotype and that Metatron has pushed all over his video. What was ancient Egyptian skin color? Metatron says that they were tanned. But looking at their art, we see that 99% of their art shows black, brown, or reddish-brown color. Meaning that brown was the average color. It is not tanned, but brown. But as I said earlier, there is a difference between a tanned person and a black person who is packed with melanin. It lays in the amount of melanin in their skin. Chikanta Diop said that after testing the skin of some mummies in his laboratory, the evaluation of melanin levels allowed him to classify the ancient Egyptians unquestionably as blacks. But I know that many people hate Diop and call him an Afrocentrist. And you know what? Let's assume that it is true. Let's find something else, okay? Well, in 2005, Dr. Anna Maria Makota and Dr. Vermeeren analyzed mummies of nobles in ancient Egypt. We are not talking about some random mummies discovered in the Delta during the late period. We are not talking about some Nubian mummies discovered in Sudan. We are talking about nobles. People of the high society of Kemet. Powerful people, indigenous Egyptians. Living in the capital city of Thebes. In other words, there are no higher status than these people in ancient Egypt except the royals. Not one, not three, but 273 mummies of nobles who lived during the New Kingdom, the golden age of the Egyptian civilization. From the 18th to the 22nd dynasty. These dates are very important because they precede the so-called Nubian invasion of Kemet. So, here Egypt is under full Egyptian control, and the power is centralized in Thebes, under a native Egyptian pharaoh, the same city where these nobles lived and were buried. And what did the analyzers say? Well, here's what the scholars concluded. Skin sections showed particularly good tissue preservation, although cellular outlines were never distinct. Although much of the epidermis had already separated from the dermis, the remaining epidermis often was preserved well. The basal epithelial cells were packed with melanin, as expected for specimens of Negroid origin. Do we have to go deeper, or should we stop here? Do we need comments? This further debunks all Metatron's wishful thinking. It is in perfect alignment with everything I say in my videos. Ancient Egypt was a black civilization with a black population, but especially a black African elite who came from the south. And it has been this way from the beginning to its collapse. And this is confirmed by ancient Europeans' depictions of ancient Egyptians. We can see here. Priests were also part of the nobility. So, this is not a tan. It is melanin. When we apply that to ancient Egyptians, the answer is clear. They were black people. So, race is defined by phenotype, not genetics. It is the core element used today to discriminate black people.
Eu tenho que me concentrar muito, todos os dias. Eu só queria jogar futebol, só quero jogar, só quero fazer de tudo pelo meu clube e pela minha família.
But strangely, when it comes to ancient history and the greatest civilizations, the same people become unable to see race anymore. How do you explain that? Before concluding this video, I want to ask you something. The next time you meet Crepin Diatta or Vinicius Jr., please remind them that they look like kings and that they should stay strong. If you enjoyed and learned something new from this video, don't forget to like. Do you think that genetics is necessary to determine people's race? Or do you think that anthropology is more precise? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Mr. Imhotep's channel, and see you in the next one.